Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Games People Play. Bernie Corbett, your host. I remain your host here this week. Very pleased to be back at our location here. It's all location. We're back at Blake's Restaurant and Tap here in the Indigo Hotel lobby. And if you're in the Boston Garden area, of course, there's excitement there tonight with Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals. The Celtics trying to once again stave off elimination and bring the series back to Miami. That'll be their task just across the street, literally and figuratively, from our location here on Front Street. But we strongly suggest if you're in the area, you might be traveling to Boston here during the summer, check out the Indigo Hotel and check out Blake's here. Tyler and everybody, the rest of the staff, as always, taking great care of us, and God knows we need it. Once again, it is Memorial Day weekend upcoming. And we have a very special guest with us here, breaking precedent a bit. As he just reminded me, the first guest that did not attain professional status as an athlete, although he was an athlete of note, but more importantly here for our Memorial Day week edition, we have what I would refer to, and to refer to someone as I open here today, to refer to someone as an American hero should never be done without the requisite evidence to support the assessment. And our guest today on Games People Play is truly a hero by all criteria. In the words of former Air Force head football coach and Pro Football Hall of Famer Bill Parcells, he's got a few pelts on his horse. And we are honored to have with us on Memorial Day edition of Games People Play, former Air Force quarterback and even more significantly, retired Major General Mike Worden. Mike, a warm welcome to Games People Play. Great to spend some time with you here today.
Well, I'm honored to be with you and humbled to be here on a Memorial Day show. So glad to be with you.
Indeed, very apropos for us. And Mike, we go back to the beginning. Is our way of telling the story on Games People Play. Your beginnings, Bellflower, California, back in California, where you actually moved to California. I believe you're about seventh grader when you moved there. And settled in, and not surprisingly, a military background with your dad. And Bellflower, California was, and St. John Bosco High School that you matriculated at were very good to Mike Worden and to his development and the man that he would become and the heights he would attain in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. That's where I was. I was very honored to be in that school, and I needed the discipline of Catholic schools to tame me and get me on a good vector for life.
A good vector. There you go. That's our first reference to aviation. There are probably a few others for your career there at the St. John Bosco class of 1972, just passing a milestone of the 50th year graduation. Right. You are a legend of Bosco, and that in itself is not to be taken lightly, because for those that may be not familiar with the legacy of St. John Bosco, it is quite an impressive athletic legacy. Sent numerous players on to play at the college level, but then to the professional level in football and baseball. I mean, just look at baseball with guys like Dennis Lamp, who pitched for the Red Sox, among many other teams. Nomar Garciaparra was long a Boston favorite, and even more recently with Evan Longoria. But a great athletic tradition that you were part of, football, baseball, and basketball, but you specifically excelled in the two sports, football and baseball.
Yeah, I was very lucky and very fortunate there. And I was in the early years of Bosco. And you're right, it was my 50th year anniversary. And as the worst class president in the history of Bosco, because I never went to one reunion. The first reunion I went to was this past fall, our 50th year reunion, when somebody found me on Google or something and shamed me into coming out. So we had a wonderful reunion this past year at Bosco. And of course, we watched a football game where our team kind of destroyed the highly ranked team they faced, and then ended up winning again. The third or fourth national championship in high school, and so I'm proud to be part of the ancient precedent of setting a winning attitude at that little school that is now has a lot of swagger and is recognized as a top college or top high school football program in the nation.
Yeah, that you were very much part of back. We always say it a half century ago. I hate when those
Yeah, that's a
going
long
around.
time
Yeah,
ago.
indeed, but part of that, indeed, part of that tradition. And it really, it begs the question to me, why so many elite athletes have been produced by that school. I mean, it's amazing. It's a relatively smaller school. I know from doing my research, but it just seems to have been one that, I mean, is it in the water there? Is it just the DNA of the kids that go through there? A certain makeup have made them have allowed them to reach a very elite status, and sometimes all the way to the professional ranks.
Right. I think it starts with it's a blue town. It's a blue collar town, Bellflower, and it's call it lower middle class. So they got a kind of a hard working ethic and maybe a chip on their shoulder for some of the beach towns around them and the big metropolis of Los Angeles basin, where there's plenty of competition and hundreds of high schools, etc. And then that 12-month a year, 365, it's got good weather. So if you're playing football, you can play in the winter, you can play in the summer. There are flag football leagues everywhere, at least when I was there. And the weather was cooperating. Similarly with baseball, we played baseball year-round. And so if you're a young person that needs discipline like I was and are going through the Catholic schools for discipline, there was no time for girls. We were always on the sports field year-round, and it created, I think, a lot of competition, a lot of experience, and a lot of teamwork. And I think that gave us a big leverage. And today, Bosco, for the past several years, I know the head coach really well, and I've spoken to him several times. He invites me in to talk to the kids and things like that, or the athletes. And it's they typically now are able to fund because they have contracts with Fox Sport Networks and other ones that are in high school now that they didn't have back in my day, but they typically go out in their non-league games and they challenge other state champions around the country.
Wow.
To play them. And Bosco says, we'll be visitors. We'll come to your place. You don't have to pay us a penny. We'll come and play your best team in your state champion.
Wow.
And that started off pretty good about 6 or 7 years ago, but now they have a few people that want to play them. So that's what really excellence is about, right? You seek the best competition you can get. You stack the odds against you, and then you go out and you win. And so they'll do that again next year. I know they play the top teams in the nation. They challenge all 50 states, and now they get a few that respond, and they'll go out and visit them and usually beat them pretty bad. But but not bad for a school that still has, as I went back this past year for the first time in a long time, about 125 people in each class. So you got 100 class, a graduating class of at least when I was there, it was 126. And then you play 5A schools and typically blow them away. Well, the result is not only the 24/7 athletic opportunities in a highly populated area because of the weather in Los Angeles, but also a proud tradition. And we have kids coming in. When I was there, we had kids from, I'll call it the western half of the U.S. We had a boarding school there that they would come to, and now they have such a reputation that people will actually move to Los Angeles to let their kids go to this school. And it's a wonderful school of opportunity. And my class put a class challenge on last October and said to all the other graduating classes of Bosco, it was called the Tuition Assistance Challenge, and we raised a lot of money because it's not a public school. They don't get any state money. It's all private and all parents involved in it. And we put a tuition assistance challenge up to help some of the poor people. And at Bosco, it's run by the Salesians, who have a reputation historically of reaching out to Africa and South America and bringing poor people and getting them educated and teaching them courage and other things. And so it's a proud tradition of fundraising, self-fundraising, and that now the school is really at the top, basically, of high schools around the world in athletic sports. Not only that, but basketball and baseball, they have similar reputations for sports and for school. It's a highly academic school too. In fact, they have 13 people going that are going to elite schools out of this year's graduating class, and with full ride scholarships. So the school is, multicolored. There's plenty of different races there. It's pretty cool to go back and see how far they've progressed since my humble days.
Indeed. And I know from St. John Bosco, his mantra was home, school, church, and playground. And it sounds like that his school has been covering those bases quite nicely in all those areas. The true man in full, if you will, and the true Renaissance man to be able to excel in all those different areas of life.
Yep. I'm just honored to have been blessed to have gone there. And it was a good foundation for a young man that didn't know what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed also the quote from the motto of the school, which I really embraced: "To God who gives joy to my youth." And it sounds like that the school brought great joy to Mike Worden's youth to make Mike Worden the man that he would become.
Yeah, it was a good place to get the right amount of challenge. And I mentioned this to Andy before, and that is it started you off on a life when you're in your formative stages and they keep raising the bar on you. So high expectations, they wouldn't yank the bar out of reach, but they'd inch it up on you all the time. But before you knew it, you were performing on the athletic field and teamwork and, and building bonds and learning academics in all sorts of character building ways. It was a great laboratory, and I just blessed to be in the right place at the right time and have that happen to me. And I think that's part of the recipe why you see so many, for such a small school, you see so many professional athletes there and business leaders who came from there, because they had the humble character development, high academic standards, high athletic standards, expectations, regardless of your economic or racial background, to really become a factory of producing high achievers and selfless high achievers.
And selfless, key word there, to set the bar high. But before we talk about football, which is what you ended up getting to college to have the opportunity to play at the Air Force Academy, you're a good enough baseball player. You attracted some pro interest coming out of high school. You chose to take the football, the scholarship route. What position did you play in baseball? I didn't find that. I guess the Milwaukee Brewers, among other teams, had some interest in it.
No, I played first base when I was there. I did a little bit of pitching because I had a good arm from football, but first base was. We had other good pitchers like Dennis Lamp that you mentioned, and
yes,
and other pitchers that were excellent pitchers. So I just had a fastball, and that was about it. So I moved me over to first base, and I played under Tom Gamboa, who's coached many pro games and many pro teams, and I was lucky enough to be there when he was coaching, and I learned so much about not only baseball but team play and leadership and all those other things. So yeah, I really enjoyed baseball, and I couldn't play at the academy because I against Penn State, I think in my freshman or sophomore year, I dislocated my shoulder on I'll call it a stiff arm that went bad.
Okay. Yep.
So
boomerang.
So anyway, I had to have surgery, and that I had to choose between baseball season and spring football, and I had to drop baseball and stick with football at the academy.
Mm-hmm. And football was a sport. You became the quarterback at the Air Force Academy. Not surprisingly, you were recruited by some elite high-end programs on the way to the Air Force Academy, among them Notre Dame and Stanford. And I thought of a quote, which I will pass along to you, from none other than Rocky Bleier. Rocky Bleier said, "There is the school you want to play football for and the school that you want to graduate from." And as I studied you, Mike, and, you went to Stanford, and, Notre Dame I'm a big Notre Dame football fan. It's pretty intoxicating to go to Notre Dame and that experience. I think you really weighed that and said, well, the school that I want to graduate from is the Air Force Academy.
Well, yeah, I mean, back then I went, this is really interesting, and how life really takes hold of you. I was so competitive as a 17-year-old in high school at Bosco, and because of Bosco principally and their high standards and demands, I had plenty of opportunities, athletic and academic, coming out of there. And it was a friend of mine by the name of Rich Ritchie who dared me to go to the Air Force Academy. Now, I toured all the military academies in Stanford and a lot of the other universities, including Notre Dame. And Rich looked at me, and he was our starting tackle on our football team and a league champion heavyweight wrestler, etc. And good friend of mine since grade school. And he challenged me to go to the Air Force Academy because that's where he wanted to go. And he teased me about it. And I went on a dare. I'll be honest with you. I didn't look up at the sky and say, I want to be a fighter pilot or anything like that. I didn't care about flying. My dad was in the Air Force. He was a finance officer.
Yep.
And a great role model for me. But I was kind of thinking of Notre Dame or Stanford, and I signed a letter of intent for each, and then I was thinking of going to Stanford seriously at the time, and he comes up and dares me. And we were so competitive, I accepted the dare. And I took he and another friend of mine who was also going to the academy to LAX. Back then, they didn't have the security of TSA and everything. And so I took them and their weeping girlfriends, and I drove my dad's station wagon. They were in the back, and I packed them, and they went out to the terminal together, and I took their luggage and stuff, and I threw a bag of my own in. And so they got on the airplane, and I had two sobbing senior high school women or girls sobbing on my shoulders, and stuff like that. And I didn't really have a girlfriend at the time. And I turned and looked at them, pulled out my dad's keys, turned to one of them and said, I don't trust those guys because I know them better than you do. So I'm going to go keep an eye on them. I handed Sarah Slavey the keys, and I pulled the ticket out of my pocket, and I walked down. And I tell you, when I walked on that airplane, those guys' eyes were as big as saucers and their jaws dropped. That's how I went to the Air Force Academy. I'm afraid to admit that, but it's the truth.
Well, that is an amazing story. Some things are planned, some things are premeditated and scripted, and some things are a little bit more spontaneous. And
yeah, that was typical 17-year-old competitive person.
Yeah, just going with your gut, as it turned out.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess if you can't trust you as a quarterback, if you can't trust your tackle, who can you trust? The guy you trust with your life. And,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
And you had some great success with your high school program then. I believe you started defensive back and then had the opportunity to convert to quarterback, tutelage of your coach. And you ran an offense that became popularized in the mid-'60s. I knew from the great success at the University of Houston, Bill Yeoman, the coach.
Right.
With the Veer offense.
Exactly.
The offense was suited very well for your school and for you talents, Mike.
Right. So I was a pretty reasonable defensive back earlier in my high school career. And then at the end of the junior year, I was working out and I was growing quite a bit. And I'd always been a pretty good student. And George Masick was my coach. And he came up to me at the end of the junior year and said, look, I've watched you throw the ball back to the quarterback. When you pick a pass off or something, you pick a ball up and throw it back in. He says, you've got a really good arm. And he knew I was playing baseball too. And I was doing well. I was on the same team as Dennis Lamp, so he heard about that. And so he said, we're going to do something. We're going to change up our offense. And we're going to run this thing called the veer option. And he'd gone to a camp with Yeoman and others and learned it. And he says he's got a new guy, maybe untested in terms of passing, but he's pretty smart. And I got a bunch of his classmates coming up, and these kids are pretty smart at this school. And I think we can really surprise everybody in all the competition by switching our offense to the veer options. Mm-hmm. And of course, he was a pretty smart guy. He's kind of like Bill Belichick up there in Boston. Yeah. And very, very intelligent and knows how to get the best out of his people. And he had smart linemen, he had smart receivers and smart backs. And so he says, I want you to be the quarterback. And nobody thought I was going to be the quarterback except him. Mm. And then he put me through a couple of camps in the nice weather of Los Angeles and all the opportunities for football camps there are. And he took our running backs, who were really good, One was an American Indian named Chief Ramirez, and then another one was a surfer named Carl Tops. And we had really we had a great wide receiver and Don Mervin, and we had the makings of good people. And he took all the backs and receivers together and says, you're going into this flag football league and you're going to play against the big schools. And you guys are going off to camps. You go to 2 college camps, and I went to 2 quarterback camps. Anyway, through that summer, we were focused on football part of that football year. I mean, after baseball season ended. And because we had those unique opportunities and that drive, we got to play together a lot at all our free time, to where the backs and receivers could kind of read my mind and I could read their mind in reading defenses out there, even though it was, just backs and receivers in this flag football team. And then, and so we did very well. We went to camps, we came back out of camps, we hung around together. And by the time football season came around and, when it was legal, we started working on the veer option, and I studied it up and they studied it with me, and the coach had this together. And so we unveiled it on our competition that year, a brand new quarterback, former defensive back, no respect, anything like that. But they didn't realize how hard we'd worked through the summer and how many camps we went to and how much we'd study that playbook. And then, so by the time the season started, nobody was ready for us. And the coach said, I just had to keep track of down and distance and what was working. And I learned how to read defenses really quick. So did the wide receivers and the backs, and the linemen were very intelligent people. And they would talk to each other, and I would just walk up and call the play, down and distance. And then they'd come back to the huddle and say, the receiver would say, hey, I think I can do a hitch and go and beat this guy, and we just talked. And I mean, for a bunch of 17-year-olds, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, we were almost, I call it, college level discussions. And the coach was very much a disciplinarian, and he would send some plays in, and you better damn well run them. But other than that, I was able to call most of the plays, and I'd look to him for a visual on the sideline, and he'd just nod or, give me a little bit of a signal. It's like a baseball signal, for a pitcher, and, but I had the option to override it. So I think we just surprised them with the veer option. And we used our intelligence, I guess, and our team play during the summer to really make a difference. And we kind of soared up the ratings. I think our first or second game, we just destroyed the number 2 team rated. And then, of course, we had a successful year.
And had that because of your knowledge and your study, not only the discipline, but you had that improvisational element to it, where once again, you could, like they say, like you play in the street ball, you run to the manhole cover and go to the left. Like you said, I can beat my guy, get it to me. And you did it to the point of 2 1,000-yard rushers in the backfield. You almost ran for 1,000 plus what you threw for. Yeah. I mean, those are prolific numbers at any level in any league. And that's just amazing as far as what you had for an offensive weaponry on that team.
Yeah, we just things came together, but it, like life, it's a lot of hard work. Nobody's looking and seeing how hard you're in the weight room or how much you're hanging around guys. And then we got fundamentals. My coach was a lot like Belichick, an absolute disciplinarian. This is in the 70s when everybody's hair's long and, and everything else. And he had us with butches. We looked like prisoners. And he didn't want any distractions with females or girlfriends.
Girls' way.
Yeah. And so he kind of, and there was no names on jerseys. We were all a team. There was none of this, white shoes or individualism. It was like, it was a team. And so he taught us a lot about teamwork, a lot about discipline, a lot about self-sacrifice, a lot about establishing first principles in terms of character development, humility, selflessness. Mm-hmm. It's all about the team, not about you, about picking each other up when things are going wrong. And so it really, I think was really strong in terms of character development, humility, honesty, integrity, selflessness, and all those things played very well in my life later on at the academy, and then in the service of the country and the military. And we had this 50-year reunion here last month, my first time back. And boy, did we get along. We got along so well because we had that foundation together, and we checked up on how people have progressed, and a lot of very, very successful people in my class, I think, as a result of that good foundational training that we got in high school.
You mentioned that the Salesian tradition. I'm a Catholic, so I know a little bit about the different sects, the Jesuits, what they're noted for. I didn't know as much about the Salesians that I heard of them, but I know the key word there is sacrifice, and that really plays into the overall theme that you present, as far as, you know, that is a primary goal to learn: selflessness, sacrifice to take.
Yeah, and if I could just, you know, I'm not living up in Boston, but I mean, I do respect Belichick quite a bit, and my coach in high school was kind of just like him, and I got to say, we trained harder, we worked out harder, we ran more sprints, and it was real smoggy back in LA back in those days. And I can remember having difficulty breathing. And he had us going through grinders, and which is kind of running on all fours for 100 yards, get up, run backwards another 100 yards, go down, sprint forward 100 yards, and then just crawl like a crab back, you know. And that was one grinder, 400-yard sprints in smog. He was doing it to build character. He was doing it so that we'd win the fourth quarter all the time. And it really paid dividends. So hard work and preparation that Bill Belichick does probably better than any coach in the NFL, with regardless of level of talent he has year after year after year. That was kind of the system I went through as a little high school teenager.
And no white shoes. I know from the interview.
Yeah, no white shoes.
Andy Bernstein, that caused quite an uproar when there was rumors about going to the white shoes. That wasn't happening.
Yeah, no, it wasn't happening. Not under Coach Masick. And he was a real disciplinarian. We went. I remember the semifinals, and we were going to play at this college, and they were playing this huge high school, and their whole stadium, their side of the stadium, was really packed. It was a big game. They were undefeated, and we showed up, and their band. We drove up on our buses, and we had to wear helmets on the buses through the LA freeway system, you know. And he was such a disciplinarian. We had to have the helmets on, even though we were going over the playbook and talking and doing little meetings all the way up. We never took those helmets off. He didn't let the helmets off on a sideline or anything like this. And when we drove up, those two buses, I remember, pulled up to the stadium. It was at night, and the lights were on. And their band was clearing the field, and their band covered the whole field. It was like a college band, you know, it covered the whole field. And they go off, and our band and our little school had like 13 people in it because it was such a small school.
Right.
And they went out there, and the other team started throwing stuff and laughing at our thing. And our coach, I remember he stood up in the front of the bus, and he says, "Look out there and look how they're treating our band," you know. And then he went to the next bus behind us, the second bus of defense, and he said, "Look what they're doing." You know, he says, you know, let's show them something, who we really are in the field. I think we destroyed them. I can't remember. It was like 38-0 or something, but we kind of destroyed them. And my dad had a bet on the game because his best friend's daughter was my age, and she was a head cheerleader on their team.
On the other side.
Yeah, and they had a bet going on. They didn't find us out till later after the game, but he had a bet with his buddy, who said, you know, if their team wins, then I have to take his daughter out and you know, treat her, and if our high school wins, then she had to take me out. Well, she was a head cheerleader. Boy, when we went to the alma mater, which is the first time you could ever take your helmet off, I took my helmet off with my shaved head, you know, buzzed head in the 70s, and she exited stage left. And so the focus was really on discipline and teamwork and achievement, and teaching those values to those young high schoolers. So that was not a big deal.
That's a great story. Yeah, she left with Elvis at that point, Mike.
Yeah,
her and Elvis both left the building.
Yeah.
and you made the decision on to Air Force and quarterback at Air Force for 3 years. And it's going to focus before we talk about obviously the military career and some of the highlights of that. My goodness. But to focus on one game in particular, I think you know the game with Notre Dame, had them on the ropes. You had varying degrees of success. Ben Martin, the coach, was a military guy, was Naval Academy guy,
Right.
Background, served in World War II.
Right.
Hall of Famer, Air Force Hall of Famer, was a 20-year head coach, had
Right.
some great success.
Yeah.
And you went back to Notre Dame twice, and you got beat pretty good your sophomore and junior year.
Yeah.
Your senior year, you get Notre Dame out in altitude, you get them out of Colorado Springs.
Right. Right.
And Notre Dame comes in 4-1. They had SC coming up the next week.
Right.
All of a sudden, the way things went everything was kind of in the favor of the Falcons that day. And you had quite a game yourself, 30-yard touchdown pass, which secured at that time a 30-10 lead in the game going into the fourth quarter. And it didn't go quite as well from then, but just to give a little bit of background, you and I guess the irony of Notre Dame and the fact that the iconic Ara Parseghian, to his credit, I loved hearing it because I was always a great fan of Ara, that he took interest in you even after the fact, even though you didn't go to Notre Dame, and he saw you in South Bend a couple of times. Now here you had Dan Devine's team on the ropes here in 1975 and going in the fourth quarter, 20-point lead.
Yeah. Well, Coach Parseghian was very humble, and every time when I was younger in the earlier years, whether it was at Notre Dame or at Air Force, when I'd go out early as a quarterback and stretch out and start throwing the ball around a little bit, he'd come over and talk to me. And every year he asked me how I was doing, and I told him I liked where I was and everything else, and things were fine. And then he of course leave me alone, and I was very humbled by that. Then as I got older, I think we played our junior year out there, and he talked me up on his show because we had to be back at the hotel room at 8:00 and everything else. I turned on the Air Precision show, and he really talked me up, and that was not good news for me, right? So anyway, and of course they were at the top of the nation back then, always in the top 10. And so there was a play, I think my junior year up there, where they had a blitz on and they came in, and I pump faked. They went up in the air. I ducked under. I went like 60 yards down to the two-yard line, got tackled, and Parseghian comes running over, and he says, "See, I told you, you got to watch out for that guy." And it was so funny. But of course they just beat me up the rest of the game. But anyway, my senior year, we were up 30-10 at home at Air Force, and 6 minutes and 10 seconds left in the game, and then Joe Montana comes out. God was on Notre Dame's side, and he scored 21 points in 6 minutes to win the game 31-30. So there were a couple of questionable pass interference calls on Air Force then, but
I noted that.
God was on their side, obviously, and they ended up winning the game. And of course, Joe Montana went on to bigger fame, and I was very fortunate. I think I got player of the game in the NCAA that particular game, that particular week. But whatever, Joe deserved to go on to that after I watched him kind of take our victory away from us. So, but it was an honor to serve there. It was an honor to play with a lot of people. Not just at Notre Dame, but we played a lot of big teams, Penn State, UCLA, a lot of big teams. And we ended up, I ended up having the good fortune of competing against some people that had very, very, very successful professional careers. So it was a real privilege to be with my teammates at the Air Force Academy, to get a little bit of the spotlight in college football. And then to take a lot of those teammates and serve our country, I think, for the next several decades very well with men of, I think, great character and courage and humility.
Indeed, you mentioned about it was really the beginning. You were right there. You had a ringside seat, unfortunately, for the very beginning of the Joe Montana legend, the Joe Cool and the comeback Joe. He had got into the lineup as a sophomore against North Carolina a couple of weeks before that, brought him back. And then here he was again. And he threw 3 interceptions in the game. His resilience that came through. And I got to ask you about one play, because I got the tape on YouTube, and I'm like, you talk about, as you just said, the Leprechauns, the Leprechauns migrated to Colorado Springs that day. Do you remember the Jim Miller interception? It would have been third interception.
Yeah.
Ball flying into the air. He fumbled the ball back at the 15-yard line. Notre Dame, like it was like a reprieve from the governor.
Yeah, I knew there was, as a good Catholic boy, I knew it was a divine intervention, and there was nothing I could do about it as a humble little mortal. It was a great game. It was a great day for me and for all of Air Force and for Notre Dame. It was just one of those things that only college football can bring forth, and I was just humbled to be part of that on that stage for that particular day. So yeah, it was amazing. We played our hearts out, and we were outskilled, outweighed, outsized, outspeeded, but we really were a strong team, and that's what they teach you at the military service academies, is to be resilient, to deal with adversity, to punch above your weight class. And on that day, we really gave them a good run for their money.
Indeed the case. Well, you speak of adversity, and at the end of your tenure at the Air Force Academy, the end of your matriculation, you attained some great honors there, as I believe you were the first in your flight class, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And the incident that we'll talk about, you talk about a signature moment. I just recounting it, I couldn't believe it. And you talk about resilience in your case. But the aforementioned Rich Ritchie, your lifelong friend, he and his squadron was first, and as was part of the curriculum with the Air Force Academy, you got involved in some flight games, as it was training, and you had an incident that would shape and the rest of your life from that point on to go forward at the tender age of 22, Mike.
Yeah, well, it started in grade school. I mean, I was an Air Force brat, so I showed up in Los Angeles, and one of the first kids I met was a guy named Rich Ritchie, and we became friends in the 7th grade. Both of us decided to go to St. John Bosco for high school, and he's the guy that dared me to go to Air Force, and he was our starting offensive tackle. He was all league, smart guy, and we ended up going to the academy together, and then Coach Ben Martin let us be roommates, which was unheard of because I think he didn't want to lose us. But anyway,
right. Make sure you stayed.
Yeah, so we were allowed to be roommates in Bull 6 Squadron, and I remember that. We needed to lean on each other to get through that year-long boot camp that the first summer and the first year is. At a service academy, so we put up with a lot of hard times then for us, and we banded together, so that forged us even more. And then we played football together, and Rich was a starting guard, I think, our senior year, and by golly, we were in different squadrons then, but we both qualified for pilot training at the same base. So we went to base in Texas together to learn how to fly jets, and we finished at the top of our class. So he got an F. We both wanted to be fighter pilots. He got an A-10. I got an F-4 back in those days, and then ironically enough, he got married right after the academy, and I was at his wedding, and so we're very close. And I was very close to Sarah Slaby, who was his wife, and she's the girl I handed the keys to when I went to the academy.
The crying girl at the airport, yes.
Yeah, so we ended up going to bases in Arizona. He went down to Davis Monthan, which is near Tucson, for A-10 training, and I went to outside of Phoenix, a base called Luke Air Force Base. And because the weather's really good in the southern states like Arizona, we always have clear blue skies. It's good for training in airplanes, right? So we graduated. Both of us were at the top of our class in our first sort of training to be fighter pilots. We had also gone to Fighter in the New Mexico course together, and we lived in trailers right next to each other, 10-foot, no, 12-foot, no, 20-foot trailers in the middle of the desert.
Oh,
That's all we could afford as second lieutenants.
wow.
And
It's not in existence.
yeah, but he was married and I wasn't at the time, and I knew Sarah, so I was like the third wheel in their marriage, and without getting into a lot of funny stories about that, but so we're now at different bases. We're training. We're at the top of our class, and there's a graduation exercise where people are carrying live weapons, and we're fighting against the I think it was the New Mexico and Arizona Guard. Actually, it was New Mexico Guard, I think, in Arizona Reserve, but they were the bad guys, and us students were doing a briefing together, and we had instructors, of course, flying with us to keep an eye on us. And I got to brief, he got to brief. We talked to each other on the phone before the game. Then we had the Super Bowl graduation exercise, and then we got up in the air, and I was flying an airplane that was in charge of air superiority, and he was leading the strike in against the targets that were in these valleys, the Goldwater bombing range in Arizona. And we got up and we checked into each other. We were flying. I was trying to provide air cover for him. And I looked down, I heard his voice call, nail one is in, which means he's starting to attack the target and strafe the target. So with the cueing of his radio call is in, I glanced down and I knew where the valley was. I knew where the targets were. And I got down, I got a wing flash. I saw him going in on his first run. And that big GAU-8 gun, he strafed a column of tanks, and there was a really good run. I mean, great strafe. You could see those rounds hit those tanks and tear them up. And then he came hard left off the target, to avoid the frag. We call it frag, but ricochets and metal blowing up in the air and stuff like that, so it wouldn't hit his airplane. And he came off hard left, and then he caught his left wingtip, clipped the top of a ridge line. He cartwheeled in and blew up, and of course I saw it with my eyes. I was probably at, I don't know, 25,000 feet, but and maybe 3 or 4 miles, maybe 6 or 7 miles away, but I could see it. And so then we, of course, sort of terminated the exercise. Everybody went home. I landed, talked to my squadron commander, and said, "Sir, I just lost my best friend. I'd like to go down," and I told them, and they called down to Davis Montham, who knew what had happened, and the chaplain down there was going to go to Sarah's house, and I asked him to wait for me, and I drove from Phoenix down to Tucson, and met up with the chaplain, drove over because I knew exactly where they lived because I visited them on the weekends, right, when we were going through training. And so, I was probably 22, 23, somewhere in there, years old. And I went in and with the chaplain and broke the news to Sarah. When she saw me, she wasn't that upset, but when she saw the chaplain behind me, she got, nervous. And so it was something that an accelerated life, being in the military or coming out of the academies would present you, and it was a pretty tough thing. And then of course took her back to LA, met her mom and dad. Her dad had passed. Her mom and her sister, who I knew, and then we arranged and coordinated the body to go up to, or was left of the body to go back up to the Air Force Academy, where we buried him with honors at the Air Force Academy cemetery. And we had A-10s fly over, and F-4s both flew over from the squadron that I was in. So it was sort of surrealistic, to go through that. And I know I was asked by Andy after talking about that episode, did I have any doubts about flying? I said no. I was super competitive, and I was super committed to service of the country, and it almost resolved me more to say, in memory of Rich, I'm going to succeed in this because he and I were so close. We thought alike. We acted a lot alike. And I kind of carried on for Rich too. So that was the experience of a 22-year-old seeing his best friend die, and then going and walking his family and a girlfriend of mine through the experience. And then, of course, right back into the fray. I went after the funeral back to Germany, my first assignment during the Cold War. And so right on to what I wanted to do as a cadet. I wanted to go in the Cold War and be on the front lines facing the Soviet Union and protecting the Western way of life. So I was fortunate to get that, and had a great service life after that. Very blessed to be in the right place at the right time so many times in my Air Force career.
And a real tribute in every sense of the word to your friend who you've articulated, you've recounted, was the reason that you ended up there. I mean, it's just the way that came full circle is it's remarkable. It really is to think about. My goodness. You mentioned about early on assignment in Europe in the Cold War, and then were called upon with a number of engagements where you were in the forefront. We have a chance to talk about it. Desert, I guess next was Desert Storm was of significance, was where you were right in a leading role as a vice commander of Air Combat Command for Desert Storm. I got to ask you, Mike, as somebody that was in your position, what was the American preparedness at that point to have been thrust into that? That was what, January of 1991, I believe.
Right.
All of a sudden you were faced with that from your standpoint, and from your standpoint high up, to all of a sudden to be in a wartime situation from where you were.
Yeah, well, actually, I ultimately became the vice commander of Air Combat Command, but in 1991, I was a major. So,
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, so I can tell you, you go from the Rich Ritchie event, and then for my career, like I said, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and very, very, very lucky in assignments and timing and everything else. It was probably the hand of God more than it was certainly me or my achievements. So the very first thing, when I was in that F4 squadron in Germany, right after graduating from the academy and going through 2 years of jet training and becoming mission qualified, a couple of my high school football defensive backs who have a swagger and an attitude of their own, they were with me as second lieutenants in these fighter squadrons in Germany, and we still hung around together. Those bonds of playing football, those bonds of sports, dealing with adversity, and having the resiliency and learning how to adjust and how to communicate and how to be team players. That played itself full out as a second lieutenants flying fighters. And one of the things we did, we were competing to become flight leads, and I happened to be, back then, black-haired, dark-skinned, and young. And I got qualified in a system called LORAN in the F4, and I was one of the youngest guys to get in it. And then all of a sudden, the Iranian hostage crisis happened in 1980, or 79 or 80.
79, yeah.
Yeah, and I was a first lieutenant. But because I was dark-skinned and had black hair, I was selected to be part of the Iranian hostage rescue mission at the age of probably 24. And so I ended up deploying to kind of I guess it's so long ago, it's not secret anymore, but
you can tell us.
To Turkey.
Okay.
And, at a base out there, and we were undercover. I remember, I think they had black flight suits for us, and they were trying to teach us Farsi. And so, for being so young and being thrown right into, I'll call it history, was also very interesting for me and challenging. And I don't want to dwell too much because it got canceled. Our mission was and we rehearsed and trained so much for this mission. I was gone I just gotten married. I got my wife pregnant, and I disappeared for 90 days on a quote unquote secret mission. So that was another interesting thing. And then of course it ended up in a debacle and canceled by the Carter administration. So I got to come home, and I had grown a beard. I was dark. I was, and I went to Frankfurt Airport to try to get my wife to come back to Germany. She had come back to the States because she didn't know where it was, what I was doing.
Oh,
We were just newlyweds. So anyway, she came back and didn't recognize me. I had flowers for her standing there, and she just walked right by me. I guess I looked like an Arab or something. But anyway, so she looked at me, and she says, "I think you need a razor. You need to shave that off." So I went into the bathroom at Frankfurt Airport and shaved. So she kissed me. So we ended up patching up our relationship. She's still married to me after all these years, believe it or not. But anyway, I mean, that was the first real episode I had with operations and in combat and potentially putting your life at risk in service of the country, was to be part of a big exercise to try to free our hostages in Iran. And I was very young at the time, right? And then the next thing was Desert Storm. So I was a major in 91. And again, I have to be at the top of my flying game by then. Because usually you start off and they just want to make you the best fighter pilot you can be, right? And so I had gone up through flight lead and through instructor, and then I was head of standard evaluation, which is the in charge of all the instructor pilots and all that stuff. So I was at the top of my flying game technically, and it just so happened that we had 1991 came around, and we had been training at Red Flag, and I was one of the first guys into the F-16 as an instructor pilot there. So I had a lot of time in the F-16, and I was a wild weasel pilot, which means we're the guys that go in first and take care of air superiority and attack the missile sites, the surface air missile sites and things like that. So again, I happened to be in the right place, the right position at the right time, and our squadron got called to go forward, and I ended up flying and serving a country in the Desert Storm, which a lot of you can probably remember as they came up. They coined the term shock and awe and all that stuff. But it was really relatively easy, I would say, because when we were young officers, we were trained by Vietnam veterans who had come back and were pretty bitter, but very, very proud and very good. Mm-hmm. And they had all that combat experience. And I remember they came back in that generation, heavy drinking, heavy flying, hard flying, very experienced, and they took no nonsense. And despite the expletives and all that stuff, they just trained us to be better than they ever were. And that was their conviction. And God bless them for doing that. I mean, their methods were pretty brutal. Yeah. We ended up being pretty doggone good, and they kept raising the bar as they began to retire in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And they raised the bar so high, expectations and performance so high that when we went to Desert Storm, I'll be honest with you, having been there in the first raids, et cetera, like there in the air and as a mission commander, it wasn't as tough as those toughest red flags we had in training over the deserts of Nevada. It's just like Belichick, I guess, Ted. You have a scrimmage or you have a preseason game, or he puts you in situations where it's almost as tough or tougher mentally or adversarially than the actual game itself. It's all planning and preparation and training and standards and accountability and etc. So I'm not saying it was easy, because there are bullets and missiles flying all over the place, and we had some guys shot down and everything else. But the shock and awe comes from hard, convicted, professional training, not Top Gun movies, hard, professional training. Mm-hmm. So I got to credit the American culture and the Vietnam generation for having that resolve to make sure that this would never happen to us, that the next time we were called onto the stage, it wouldn't be a fair fight. And it would be, we didn't coin the term, but somebody coined it, shock and awe. It was really high training, high expectations, and readiness, right? And training and preparation. So we just practiced harder than anybody else, I think.
Yeah, just right back to athletics, as you say,
Right, exactly.
Being a big movie guy, you mentioned about those Vietnam veteran guys that train you. I think of one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite actors. I think of Robert Duvall and The Great Santini.
Right.
It was that the way you characterized it. There was just one guy. There was a whole bunch of those guys that were training you.
Exactly. And I got a Santini story I'll tell you once, because hopefully we'll have some veterans watching this and they'll like the young lieutenant, the crazy lieutenant fighter pilot. But the defensive back we had, a guy named Tim Cantwell and I were in the same squadron, and we were going to deploy to Turkey to do some training. And this is, again, my first assignment. And of course, we didn't rank because we were second lieutenants. So all the captains and majors got to fly the jets to this deployed location.
Okay.
And we had to ride with the maintenance crews in a C-130. It was in the summer. It was hot as heck. And we're going out towards the Middle East. And we're leaving Germany. And we were, lieutenants kind of up to no good. And so we wouldn't get sick because we were fighter pilots. Nothing could get us sick, because of the G loads and things that we've been under. So yeah. Timmy's in the back of this, and it's packed and it's hot and it's bouncing around, and you can see some of the enlisted maintenance personnel, kind of getting white and stuff like this. So Tim takes his K rations, and you have a little canned soup in that, and so he swallows this soup, and then he has a pit helmet on, so he pulls his pit helmet off because we're flying to a deployed location in the Middle East. Okay. And then the thing's bouncing around. He goes, "Hey, I got to go to the bathroom," and everybody's in web seating, and he starts moving his way up on this military aircraft, and he gets about halfway, and he says, "I'm not feeling so good," and then he pukes all his soup into his pit helmet, and the entire airplane started throwing up. And we thought it was so funny as lieutenants. And then we landed at, I won't tell you the base where it was because it was an undisclosed location, and on a deployment. And Lieutenant Worden and Lieutenant Cantwell had to stay behind and clean that whole airlift up. I mean, it took us 2 days to clean it. I mean, we were down with toothbrushes, and the maintenance supervisor, the sergeant, was running the chain gang, to clean that up. But anyway, for the military veterans on Memorial Day that have many memories and the enlisted ranks and everything else, and have dealt with lieutenants before, boy, did we end up at the short end of the stick on that one, because we missed 2 whole days of flying. Scrubbing that out. God, that's my Santini story for Tim
right there. I
can think football player.
I can think of the great Santini with that scene. Yep, there's a scene that's exactly like that. That's
amazing. Well, we were inspired by the great Santini to do that. At least Tim was. Okay, enough deviation.
That's beautiful. And well, that was the shock and awe of the Desert Storm, and then, of course, 10 years later, 9/11, and you're even more in the forefront with 9/11 because of the rank that you would attain a decade later and called upon once again, Mike. There you are. And Nation calls again, and there's Mike Worden once again to answer.
Yeah. So, I was in Desert Storm. I was fortunate enough to be a mission commander, lead the raids. I mean, the biggest raid, I think I read, had 80 bombers and fighters in it, going down to Baghdad. So, I mean, it was a privilege to be at your top of your game, and then in charge of planning and executing and controlling all those airplanes in a combat arena, So I was very, very fortunate just to be at the right level of seniority and the right position to have that experience and to see how that training is playing off when you're, when the lead is flying, so that really that combat experience of flying, just about every day for a long time, along with my peers. I mean, I was just one of many people of my generation that did that. And, I don't deserve to be singled out, other than I was senior enough to be a mission commander, but not the only mission commander out there on every day. So, and the training from red flags and flying with the Navy and other things really helped out too. But my next experience was I was a commander in Alaska, and I had a A-10 squadron, and they were deployed to Kosovo. So for the Kosovo War in 1999, I was able to go out with them and participate in the Balkans War in 1999. And at a different level. I was a young colonel at the time, and I was able to see more of the operational level of war as opposed to the tactical fight itself. So that was a good experience, and our A-10s did very well there. It was a different environment, and I was able to learn a lot from firsthand experience there. And then you said 9/11 happened, and right after 9/11, of course, we responded in Afghanistan.
Right.
And let's see, I happened to be at the time I had taken command of the biggest NATO wing in the biggest wing in NATO, and it happened to be at the time it was a fighter wing, at least it was in Aviano, Italy, which had been the base from which we had launched the Balkans War. And it was one of the big bases that participated in the Balkans War, and I happened to be now old enough to be, I think it was a 1-star, and a wing commander at Aviano Air Base. And that was at the time when we were going to, we had already turned the tide on the Taliban, and now it was the invasion of Iraq in 2003 because of Saddam Hussein, etc. And George Bush the Younger was president, and I was picked to go back to the Pentagon, actually to South Carolina at 9th Air Force Headquarters, to plan the war. That if the president decided to invade Iraq, then I was on the planning staff. So anyway, we went back to the States. I went back to the States and planned. Then I came back to NATO in Italy, where I was the commander there, and then I had to grab I'll just say a U.S. government jet in civilian clothes. And it was a real interesting assignment for me because all I had on board was my Turkish-speaking chief master sergeant, who was in charge of security, and a contracting officer with 4 suitcases full of cash. And we deployed. We landed in a place called Diyarbakir, East Turkey, near the Iraqi border. And my mission there was to stand up 3 bases and build 3 basically NATO bases, U.S. bases basically, in northeastern Turkey, right across the Iraqi border, and work with the Turkish government, I had 3 assignments to Turkey by then, so I knew a lot of them, and the officers that I grew up with were now, running their military. So anyway, so I had stand up 3 bases, and if you remember in history, the Turks ended up canceling military operations, because our plan was to come down from the north out of Turkey and come up from the south, out of Saudi Arabia and the Kuwait area, and sort of have a dual attack from the north and the south to divide the Iraqi forces, so that it would make it easier for us to get to Baghdad and occupy the country. Well, there was a political thing that went on. Anyway, the Turks said no, and they shut down the northern operation after I had spent a lot of money building up those bases. So that was kind of my experience. I was in the planning of it. I was on the daily VTC with the commanding general, and then after that had ended, and I started closing the bases down and moving all the forces we had, we left the Special Forces contingent up there. And after the war ended, Saddam Hussein and the Republican Guard was still misbehaving up north and killing Kurds in the northern part of Iraq. And we had a ceasefire going, and so I stayed around until we got the Special Forces out of there. And then I forgot to mention to you, a little bit confused, that it was really after the Gulf War that I stayed and went in with Special Forces into northern Iraq. but
Uh-huh.
it was not this one. This one we buckled up, came home, we got to Baghdad quicker than we hit, and I stayed there until the peace treaty came up, and then I went back to Italy and back into my NATO command over there. So yeah, I was in the right place there.
Amazing.
And I forgot to mention earlier that I was able to stay after for an operation called Provide Comfort after the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, and work with the special forces inside of northern Iraq to save the Kurds, basically. So that was another interesting experience where I wasn't flying an airplane.
Yeah.
But I was on the ground with special forces. So all in all, I think that Bosco training, that academy training, and the joint training, I was able to be in the right place at the right time with great Americans. And on Memorial Day, I just want to tell you that the last one I mentioned, which is called Operation Provide Comfort for the Kurds, that was I had 26 different U.S. bases, representatives that had deployed from 26 different U.S. bases of all services came together under my command, deployed forward, and I came from a different base too. And to see Americans come together from the Army, the Special Forces, the Navy, Marines, and Air Force all come together, all very young, to really perform some miraculous accomplishments in less than 2 weeks is a testimony to our country. And I think it's only in America where you can do that because we're a multiracial, pretty highly educated public, and we come in, and there is from our all volunteer services a great obligation and commitment to listen, to come together as a team, and to do some things that the politicians shouldn't be asking of us to do, and we did them anyway. We pulled it off. So I was very proud. It goes back to Bosco and the academy and all those adversity getting put into situations where people are asking you to do something that is almost unachievable, and then you do it anyway because you're Americans and you know how to do that. And for 20 years of fighting and flying in coalition operations, they always lean on the Americans to pull this disparate team together of countries that don't necessarily get along together.
Yeah,
I can remember in Turkey we had Ali, who was an American. His mother was Turkish, and he spoke Turkish, and he sacrificed flying with us in F-16 so that he could do the political diplomatic management on the ground to make sure that the Turks wouldn't get in our way, or wouldn't hamper us. And he was an American, he was a fighter pilot too.
Stepped aside.
We have that cultural outreach and connections because we're a multiracial, multi-background country. And every coalition partner I was in for 20 years, they were always leaning on the Americans to get behind, and we would lead them. And I can give the story after story of how we allowed those nations to preserve their honor. Like for example, in the Balkans wars, we let those Italians fly. We called it border cap, combat air patrols over the Adriatic to protect their country, right?
Yep.
And we gave them that honor, and they in turn let us use their bases. And then the Americans would go downtown, with maybe some Brits, maybe some French, but so everybody was allowed to have a place they were comfortable with in a coalition, and it took the diplomatic skill of Americans to do that from all our services. So I'm very, very proud to be from this country, and from a joint officer working with other services, Marines, Army, Air Force, it doesn't matter. We come together to get the mission done, and we had that focus, and I'm just proud that I was a product of that training system in that country and that culture.
33 years and to your retirement in 2009. And as you mentioned, you were, as you describe it, the right place at the right time, but the most important, most significant places at the right time for you to contribute over a remarkable 33-year career, Mike. This has just been amazing to have you recounted. It really has been. My goodness.
Well, I was, like I said, very lucky. I wasn't necessarily the best fighter pilot or the best general or the best officer, but I just happened to be with a bunch of other people that probably got me promoted ahead of my peers.
and retired as a major general.
Yeah.
And as we conclude, I know there was a term that came up, and once again, the interview that you did with Andy, the description of the servant leader,
Right.
and to characterize. I think that that really resonated with me about who you are and what you exemplified during the course of your career. That particular term, if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I will. And I think it's apropos today because it looks like the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is going to be CQ Brown. And CQ Brown was part of this story. And he used to work for me, right? But now he's going to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So it's a small world, isn't it? But anyway, CQ was hired to be under me, when I was commander of the Air Force Warfare Center, to be the new commandant of cadets. The commandant of the the weapons school, right? And that's in charge of training the best of the best instructors in every weapon system, whether it's an airlifter, whether it's space, or whether it's cyberspace, or whether it's fighters, or there's bombers. The very, very best combat leaders in those areas come to this school called the Fighter Weapons School. It's kind of like Navy Top Gun, except Navy Top Gun's only 4 months long. The weapons school, I should say, the weapons school is a year long, and it's a year-long boot camp.
Okay. Big commitment.
Only very, very best craftsmen or technicians that the Air Force has to offer. And so I brought him in to be the head of the commandant of the weapons school, right? Which is, sort of the master Jedi of the Jedi Knights, I guess you'd call it. So he came in, and there was a philosophy change at the time. In my generation, when I was young, I was telling you that the Vietnam veterans, God bless them all, went through that bitter experience, and they imparted on us, my generation, I'll call it the desert generation, right? Mm-hmm. They imparted on us such high standards and take no prisoners in the debrief, and absolutely candid feedback. And but they would beat us up in dogfights, and they would humble us, right? And they were vulgar and heavy drinking, but boy, they were good. Mm-hmm. In my generation, and I remember as a young pilot getting humiliated by them, right? That was their technique on getting me to withstand adversity and improve. Well, when I got there, and the culture was changing, and I would say that CQ Brown, the to-be chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I think, was right there at the right time, because we changed the culture around that time. And he was a great advocate of this as we had changed it. It was, the mantra there was humble, approachable, credible.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And every leader at that time in our generation, that was the mantra, where we were to be a Jedi Knight. And CQ was a Jedi Knight. He still is. You can see the patch on his arm.
Yep.
It was to be humble, because it requires humility to gain respect, especially amongst coalition partners or other services or in mixed audiences, etc. Your humility gains instant respect, right? And you have to have personal integrity to have true humility, authentic humility, right? And then approachable. I would never approach the Vietnam veterans that trained me. I was scared to death of them, right?
Petrified.
So I was not able to go up to them and ask them a vulnerable question, right? Because I would feel humiliated, right?
Fear of retribution.
I might respond.
Yeah.
But to be approachable, if you're a Jedi Knight, you want the most scared lieutenant or sergeant or whoever to be able to come up to you, because you're welcoming and you listen to them with that humility. So you've got to be approachable as a 4-star general, right? You've got to be approachable as a leader, as a combat leader. You need to have the coalition partner who is afraid and doesn't like the mission you gave him, etc., to be able to come up to you and not to fear you, no matter how good you are. I mean, just when you're really credible, which is the third thing, you got to be the most credible person you can in whatever you're doing, right? Which means you've got to be knowledgeable, you've got to be experienced, you've got to have good character, etc. So the mantra, from being the best F-16 pilot in the world and only the best come here to go to this school, and you better be the best by the time you graduate, to learn to be humble, learn to be approachable by all, and you still though have to be the best F-16 driver in the world, right? The credibility is still upon which this builds. So we changed the mantra, and I give some credit to CQ Brown, because he was there in the engine room when this was going on. And I think he lives and exudes that today, and I'm proud of him for doing that. But yeah, we're changing the culture to be humble, approachable, credible, and it still is the mantra at the weapons school at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada today, where the U.S. Air Force Warfare Center is. So yeah, that's a story of being a servant leader. And so the Air Force produces servant leaders that are very credible in warfighting, but also very approachable to civilians, to subordinates, to fellow service members. And when you're a humble leader, people will follow you and risk their lives for you more than if they're browbeaten by somebody that they fear.
Indeed the case. Well, I come away from this, I think that the confidence level on many levels in our country has been shaken. I'm going to come away from this, and I think anybody that views it is going to come away feeling better and more confident about our country, about our preparedness, and for that very reason, what you just outlined with the advent of and the transformation to the servant leader, that we're, despite all and all the challenges and all the slings and arrows, I hope you agree with me after spending this time with you, that we're still in pretty good hands overall moving forward, and that we're still in the forefront, and America is still the one that, particularly in times of trouble, is the one that's called on to step forward and to lead.
Yeah, well, I think that's credible, because I still believe that the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Special Forces, the U.S. Air Force, and now the Space Force, they're not, on social media. The leaders in there are not on social media. They don't have time. They are training so hard. Mm-hmm. They are not, caught up in the political fractionization. Yes, they are, because our uniformed military is subservient to the civilian leaders. And yes, when the civilian leaders, the politicians, the administrations come down with policies, we are duty bound to execute those as part of the executive branch. However, there is an unwavering obligation and commitment to protect this country in hot wars, I'll call it, or even in cyber wars. And so they're too busy. I mean, I had to really work to figure out which president or which nominee for president to vote for, because I was so doggone busy. I didn't have time to watch the news. I didn't have time. So these people are in the gym working out. I mean, they are working out. And even if there's some fraying and divisiveness in society, they know that they have to survive as one team, one fight. And so they're in the gym, and they realize that. And it's going to take quite a bit of time, I think, to dull that blade that's being sharpened every day. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take more than one administration or two administrations or whatever to change that culture, because it's just really, really deep. And there's that selflessness, and the servant leaders that are serving there are making sure that their people are focused. So I've been retired for so long now, I can't speak currently about the effects of them, but I have faith in people like CQ Brown and others that we trained and we brought up, that their experiences are deeply embedded in their obligation to protect this country, regardless of how volatile it might be or divisive it might be. But they are taking that pledge to the Constitution, and they take it very, very seriously. So I'm still pretty optimistic that they will get through, I guess, these volatile sort of situations that we're in, because they're eyes on the ball. and they were taught to keep their eyes on the ball. And it's going to take a couple of administrations to unravel that.
Never,
If it's being unraveled, I don't know.
well, yeah, never wavering. I think that's very encouraging, very heartening. And God bless America, Mike, and God bless you. It was great that the time was, we knew it was going to be a bit of a departure, and it was, and it was quite a departure, remarkable departure to spend time with you today. As I said in the open, a true American hero, and enjoy your family and your retirement, because God knows you've earned it. What you sacrificed and what you gave to this country, absolutely a remarkable, accelerated life.
Well, I'm not alone. I'm not a hero, but the people I serve were the real heroes to the military, and I think they'll all tell you that is the spouses. I mean, I was away probably probably 60, 70% of my time from home. And the real heroes are those very strong spouses who raise families and sacrifice so much. They're the heroes. And it's a team sport. It's not an individual sport. So I appreciate your compliments. But all my dedication, all my instincts tell me that the nation's gratitude needs to go to those military families, especially the spouses who have to endure so much sacrifice. I've been to too many funerals with them to not realize that. And I think everybody serving on active duty or retired will agree that the heroes are the spouses and the families that endure that and are giving as much sacrifice as the individual warrior.
Far be it for me to tell you what to do, but remember your wife in that spirit with some flowers this weekend, Mike.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Mike, thank you so much for you played. I always say with our guests, they played the game well, and the games people play. You played on a whole different level with us here today. And so glad to make your acquaintance and have this opportunity to recount your life and times. And all the best. I guess it's kind of a misnomer to say Happy Memorial Day weekend, but Memorial Day weekend acknowledged with you and through you, and God bless you, man. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm humbled and honored to be a guest member of you on this Memorial Day. Thanks for being a part of sports, which is so critical to success. I think engagement in sports, it teaches you so much about life. And thanks for all you do and the reach that you have as a great American in this wonderful country.
Well said. I can't add anything to that except my thank yous here for our special Memorial Day edition of the Games People Play. Thank you to everybody, Tyler in particular, who's our contact here that takes care of us so well here at Blake's on Friend Street in the north end of Boston, just across from the TD Garden, and my co-founder and spirit animal and partner in crime here, I guess you could say, Andy Bernstein. Thank you to
Andy. Great to see you, Andy.
Likewise. I hope to talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for this privilege, both of you.
Absolutely.
Indeed. It was our pleasure and our privilege as we thank Mike Worden for joining us, retired Army Major General, and in a land far, far away, was a former Air Force quarterback also, and a remarkable life recounted here today on the Games People Play. Until next time, Bernie Corbett, Andy Bernstein from Blake's here, and play well, everyone.